Revelations of Alignment. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Ancient Taoist philosophy. This is a story about alignment, readiness, and learning, and why those things matter long before we ever get to a dog. I first started working with Liz as her official student in 2019. She started a Shiatsu student group from all over the world who all came to Scotland a few times a year to do a weekend of practical work. I started within the new cohort and probably a little ahead of the curve as I had watched Liz in person many times and asked about 1,000 questions about the process, mechanics, and theory. It's not easy theory to get your head around at first, and she tells us that. Practical is best to get the feel and learning your anatomy, all which were fine by me. My academically minded brain wants to know why something works and not just what to do. But of course, during this first year, there was mention of the years to come, and words like hara and chi and meridian lines were thrown about, which I'll be frank, I just didn't know how to file these. They kind of sat on a shelf in the part of my brain labelled miscellaneous, might have more info later. I remember being in awe about how the ancient Japanese could have known as much as they did. Our science is literally only catching up now about how organs communicate with each other, and the importance of fascia being two recent examples. Much like you probably are when thinking about or touching muscle, I was a bit like, I couldn't tell a tough one from a weak one, and what the heck is normal supposed to feel like? Well, as it turns out, I just needed to touch 10, 20, 40, 100 bodies in various states to give my hands the feedback to find the feel. It comes down to subtle biological feedback, with my hands acting as sensory transducers, converting mechanical, thermal, and electrical changes into neural signals that then read pressure, density, micromovement, temperature, and tone. Information the nervous system is very good at reading once it has enough reference points, mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, and proprioceptive feedback in the hands. Cool, huh? So mechanics, anatomy, all grounded. But meridian lines? I side-eyed them like they were straight out of a fairy tale. Then along came lockdown, and I stuck in my lane. For the last 6 years, I just got good at the bits that made sense to me, and the other stuff gathered dust on the shelf somewhere in the back of my brain. When the circuit closed, I have had headaches for the last few months, and I am not a headachy type of person, much less a person who takes pain meds, and yet until very recently, I was taking an aspirin almost daily just to function. I was so concerned, after a run of successive viruses and persistent laryngitis, not fun. So I did the thing you do as a human after realising the symptoms were being covered up and not resolving alone. I decided to find out why. I had a list of things that might be going on, and at the ears, nose, and throat doctor, I lost hearing for a bit too, was living in a bubble, virus related. I mentioned the bad headaches, and she sent me for a head scan. Roll on a few weeks, and I find myself in a large room looking identical to the set of Grey's Anatomy. But you aren't free in the MRI. They headlock you in so you can't move, with a frame and hard cushion things. I was told not to touch my hands or fingers together, and to have them down by my side. Why is that? I asked. Curiosity is a curse. And was told that we make an electrical circuit that can interfere with the image. Wow, I thought. That tiny amount of human electricity can do that. And made a mental note to look up the mechanisms at play afterwards. And here's the simplified version. When we put fingers together, clasp hands, fold our arms, otherwise create a closed loop of tissue, we form a conductive circuit, a bit like joining the ends of a wire. Because our bodies are basically warm salt water, that circuit can conduct electricity. Inside an MRI, the scanner is sending out very precise radio waves and listening carefully for tiny signals coming back from the body's tissues. When you make a loop with your hands, your body can start to behave like a little aerial. It can pick up some of those radio waves, send them back out again, and slightly distort the magnetic field the scanner is trying to read. The result isn't dangerous, but it adds noise to the signal, so the image can get fuzzy or distorted, which is why they ask you not to clasp your hands together. Fast forward. I'm sitting with Liz this weekend and she is mentioning the loop we make with our bodies and chi, and a light bulb went off in my head. MRI says don't close the circuit. Shiatsu says do. And suddenly I realised the subtle biological feedback I'd been too rational to notice before. I am just tuning into my own internal wiring to notice what's flowing or stuck. Not woo-woo at all, just physics at microscopic scale. Plot twist. The MRI didn't reveal anything sinister, so I worked through other things that might be causing my symptoms. Eye test. Wow, those things are invasive these days. My last one was just cover one eye and read at a distance. Now it's having air puffed at your lens, pictures taken of the retina, and pressing buttons to catch the dancing little light that I may or may not have seen. All came back great. I have good vision far and near and healthy back of the eyeballs, so it wasn't that. My next thought was neck. Perhaps I have a weird posture that is creating havoc as I age, so a chiropractor visit was organised. Margaret was originally a GP and has lots of cool stories, as well as being a font of knowledge for all things bones and muscles. A story within this story is the original fable of how it's very difficult to help yourself, even if you know stuff. Humans overlook the bigger picture all the time, so it's a good thing to remember outside help often just tells you what you probably already know. Look, you're in a forest, there are trees, but can't see for looking. That's a long-winded way of saying I was an idiot. The great thing about alternative medicines and my experience of them is that unlike the GP, who has a very limited time with you and therefore wants to give you something to help stop the symptoms, is that the alternative guys take the time to ask the questions rather than looking at the issue straight away. She asked about my lifestyle and work and what I do during most of my working day. When was it at its worst, the pain, etc., etc. And what has changed in the last few months? Well, my living situation. I sit on a different couch with my laptop, looking down, for hours. Idiot. She explained the weight of the head and how all those hours build up and trap nerves and stop oxygen. And of course, I know this, I just hadn't seen it. She then did some cracking and moving and pulling and changing, and immediately I felt better. I remember thinking that night it was placebo effect, and it couldn't have been that simple. My pain was halved, and by the next session, a week later, I was headache-free. I also got myself a different setup for the laptop, and no longer write posts on my phone while out walking the dogs. Yes, eye roll. Anyway, the point in this part of the story is Margaret mentioned how important it was that the spine was free to move as it should. And so back in my mentor Liz's office, another light bulb went off when she mentioned spinal alignment. In shiatsu and related Japanese traditions like Zen shiatsu, martial arts, meditation, traditional movement arts, the hara is considered the body's centre of gravity and core, from which movement, stability, and balance come from. This isn't just symbolic fluff, it's about how the body naturally organises itself when breathing freely, standing or sitting with relaxed alignment, and moving smoothly. We are taught to begin a session by placing hands on the hara because it gives a kind of entry point for sensing overall tone and state in the body, feeling how the tissue responds, whether it is yielding, tense, or balanced, which helps guide our touch throughout the session. It's where physical structure, nervous system, and breath meet to support ease, grounding, and efficient movement. Many Japanese cultural practices emphasize the hara as where breath, posture, intention, and action become unified. As you may well be aware, breathing is generally a good idea, and somatic therapies include breathwork in their practice. Even the top-down model of CBT uses it to interrupt panic escalation and restore a sense of control. But here's the cincher. If your spine isn't aligned, you can't access any of that properly. You can't breathe freely, and you can't organise from your centre, so you can't maintain a clear feedback loop through touch or movement. And no amount of skills, technique, or intention will compensate. Margaret the chiropractor reminded me that being a collapsed human pretzel is bad for breathing, energy, and life. Back in Liz's office, I am quietly smiling inside with the puzzle pieces starting to fit into the bigger picture. My work over the last few years within Honest Hounds, and specifically with passing on my skills and knowledge to our mentees, has led me to do a lot of thinking and research about how important the human regulation is in the equation. Reading back over my old posts now, I noticed something I hadn't before. I use the phrase, "we teach the dog," a lot, and it's that word, we, that has needed the most attention. We can only teach if we ourselves are in a good state, especially when so much of our physiology is detected by animals, and by other humans too, albeit more subtly. State doesn't just live in the mind, it's carried in posture, alignment, and the hidden mechanics of how we inhabit our own bodies. If a calm body creates a clearer mind, it's no surprise that interoceptive awareness, breath, tone, alignment, allows us to pick up on the microdynamics within tissue. Suddenly, the shiatsu theory starts to fall into place. A dysregulated practitioner becomes noisy, a regulated one becomes sensitive. So when my teacher describes tissue or energy as hollow, dense, stuck, or flowing, those no longer feel like metaphysical claims to me. They're metaphors for pattern sensory input, the kind the human brain is exceptionally good at integrating once it stops being eclipsed by top-down control. Liz has been quietly preparing to pass on what she knows as she eases into retirement, and I can see now that I wouldn't have been ready before. Sometimes patterns only look like coincidence until you're able to see them. We don't teach from what we know, we teach from the state we're in.